Hello, I'm doing a book review, and the book I want to review is Volume 1 of Akira, or Akira. I'm actually not sure how I should be saying it, because it's spelt like the name Akira, yet I've always heard it pronounced Akira, so I'm not sure exactly what's the right way to be saying it. To be safe, I'll call it Akira, but don't be surprised if I end up slipping and calling it Akira. Now, Akira, or Akira, whichever you want to call it, is a 6-volume manga series written and illustrated by Katsuhiro Otomo. I have no idea if I said his name right or not, and this was published between the years 1982 and 1990. Now, before I did this video, I had the thought of actually reading all 6 volumes of the manga series and then reviewing them all in one video, but then I thought, nah, fuck that, so I'm just going to be reviewing each volume individually. So once again, this review is on Volume 1 of Akira. Now, just giving you all fair warning, I have problems pronouncing some English names, so you could probably bet your ass that I'm going to mispronounce a lot of names in this video. Just giving you fair warning, try not to hate me too much for it. Now, this manga series was made into the anime film of the same name in 1988, which was also directed by Otomo, the same man who wrote and illustrated the comics. Now, the movie Akira was extremely influential, and it's what introduced Western audiences to Japanese animation, or anime. And honestly, I feel like a lot of these animes that came over here to the States and found success here in the States, like Dragon Ball Z and maybe even Pokemon to a certain extent, definitely owe their success in some way to the movie Akira. Akira definitely had a big influence on some American animation as well. Now, I'm going to admit that I'm actually not the biggest anime fan, which is why it might be kind of ironic that I'm reviewing the first volume of a comic book series that inspired one of the most influential animes of all time. But here's the thing, I'm not a big anime fan, but I also have nothing against it. It's just, I didn't grow up with anime the same way a lot of my friends did, so I don't have the die-hard love for anime that a lot of my friends do, but the movie Akira is a film that I sort of just discovered a couple of years ago, and I really like the movie Akira, and this is coming from somebody who's not a terribly big anime fan, but I love the movie Akira. I think it's a great movie, because I feel like the movie Akira really does sort of transcend the anime genre, because it's also a science fiction film, it's a dystopian film, it's a cyberpunk movie, it's a political thriller, it's an action film, and it's also sort of a body horror film as well. Like, there's a lot going on in the movie Akira, but I really like the movie. Now, I know a lot of fans of the manga series are not terribly big fans of the anime film, which to a certain extent I can understand that, because the movie Akira actually came out 2 years before the manga series was even finished, and also the movie's only like 2 hours long, and this is a 6-volume manga series, so as you can imagine, a lot is condensed and a lot is cut out, but being that so far I've only read the first volume of this series, I still really like the movie. Now, I know when Otomo started writing this manga series, he drew a lot of inspiration from Ridley Scott's Blade Runner, which of course was based on the Philip K. Dick novel, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, and you could definitely see a Blade Runner influence on this comic. But I also saw an influence of stuff like David Cronenberg's Scanners, and even Stephen King's Carrie to a certain extent. I also saw a bit of an influence of Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange, in the sense that this is also a story that deals with out-of-control youths. Now, the plot of Volume 1 of Akira is it's set 38 years after World War III. It turns out that in 1992, a massive explosion happened over the city of Tokyo, which triggered World War III, I guess because people thought this was a nuclear explosion that happened. But now it's 38 years later, the year is 2030, and the world has rebuilt itself since World War III. And Tokyo has been replaced with Neo-Tokyo, but it turns out that Neo-Tokyo and possibly all of Japan is run by a very corrupt government, and the city is plagued with anti-government terrorism and gang violence. Now, the story opens up with this biker gang run by this boy named Kaneda, and Kaneda's best friend and right-hand man is this boy named Tetsuo. So, in the beginning of the story, Kaneda's gang is riding through the ruins of the old Tokyo, and Tetsuo almost hits this kid, or what appears to be a little kid, and this little kid somehow destroys Tetsuo's bike and severely injures him. After this encounter with this mysterious kid, the boy somehow disappears, and then Tetsuo is taken away by these soldiers. Tetsuo is later released, but then they end up taking him again, and they start running tests on him, because it turns out that this boy that he ran into was actually a psychic, and it turns out that this encounter with this psychic boy has actually awoken something that was laying dormant in Tetsuo's brain. It turns out that there's this secret government project that has been doing experiments on psychic children, and it turns out that Tetsuo has now developed telekinetic powers, and it turns out that he's quickly developing into a very powerful psychic. Tetsuo ends up escaping from this facility that he's been held at, and he ends up becoming the leader of this gang called the Clowns, after the Clowns discover that he has telekinetic powers. Now, it turns out that even before all this happened to him, Tetsuo has always been very emotionally disturbed, and he's also been pretty much psychotically jealous of Kaneda, so he ends up betraying Kaneda and the rest of his gang by becoming the leader of the Clowns. Now, while all this is going on, Kaneda ends up getting involved with this girl named Kei, who is part of this underground resistance against this corrupt government. Also, throughout Volume 1 of this story, you get hints of somebody or something called Akira, or Akira, however you want to pronounce it, and in the story there's this colonel who is the head of this project that experiments on psychic children, and he's horrified at the prospect of Akira coming back. Now, I'll admit, since I've only read Volume 1 of Akira so far, it's gonna be hard for me to judge how the rest of this series is going to compare to this one, but so far I'm really enjoying this series. Now, I actually am halfway through Volume 2 of Akira, but unfortunately you won't be seeing a review of that from me until November, because October is coming up, and October I always do Horror Month, so I won't be doing that review of Volume 2 of Akira until November, unfortunately. But yeah, for people who haven't read this yet, I would definitely recommend Volume 1 of Akira. Now, I actually read this book like 2 or 3 weeks ago, but I didn't get a chance to review it until now. But when I read this book, I read it in pretty much a day, and that was only because I didn't read it in one sitting. But if I read it in one sitting, I probably could have finished this in maybe an hour or two. Like this book is extremely fast-paced, yet it doesn't feel like the story is rushed, and it doesn't feel like Otomo is skipping out on any important character development. Like, it still feels like a whole story, yet the pacing is almost ridiculously quick, and I'm not saying that as a criticism, I'm actually saying that as praise for the book. Like, this is a very fast-paced book, despite the fact that Volume 1 is close to 400 pages. Now, once again, I'm halfway through Volume 2 of this series, but I am really excited to see how the rest of this series plays out. Now, one thing I really liked about this book is really the characters in the book, especially Kaneda. Now, I don't want to say Kaneda is 100% a likable character, because in a lot of ways he really isn't, and in a lot of ways he's really kind of an asshole, but what I love about it is he's billed as being sort of like the main protagonist of this story, yet he is kind of a douchebag. Like, there's this scene earlier on in the story between Kaneda and this girl, and it never makes clear if this girl is like his girlfriend or just a girl that he had a fling with, but the girl tells him that she's pregnant, clearly implying that he's the father, yet he kind of brushes it off, and you can tell he does not want to take responsibility for this baby that she's now pregnant with. So he really is kind of a douchebag, yet he's also the hero of the story. And I really feel like the character of Kei is more of a proper protagonist than Kaneda is. And I think it's hilarious how throughout at least Volume 1 of this story, it's clear Kaneda really doesn't give a shit about this underground resistance that Kei is a part of. It's clear he's just following her around because he has a thing for her and he clearly just wants to get laid. And that's what I really love about Kaneda, is he's such an asshole and he's such a douchebag, yet Otomo makes him the lead protagonist. And even though the character of Kei is sort of built up to be the secondary protagonist of the story, she really feels like more of a proper protagonist than Kaneda was. And then of course you have Tetsuo, who really is a very interesting and very compelling villain. Now, I can't possibly talk about this book without at least touching on a lot of the deeper political, philosophical, and social themes of the novel. Like, the Japan in this story, this post-World War III Japanese society, is clearly supposed to be a metaphor for post-World War II Japanese society. And so much of the book is really about this conflict between the youth of Japan and the older generation in Japan. And you see, like, the differences of attitudes between this younger generation who grew up in post-World War III society and this older generation who were probably alive before World War III happened. And once again, you could definitely draw a lot of parallels between the Japanese society that you see in this book and real-life Japanese society at this time. So in this book, there are a lot of definite parallels between the fictional post-World War III Japanese society of this story and the real-life post-World War II Japanese society. So it is a very political book, and hopefully when I get on to reviewing the other volumes of this series, I'll go deeper into the political themes of Akira. One interesting bit of social commentary that I noticed in this book is there definitely seems to be sort of a commentary on addiction in this story, because Tetsuo becomes addicted to these drugs, because in the story you realize that these psychic powers that Tetsuo has come at a price. Because of them, he develops these crippling headaches, and the only thing that helps these headaches are these drugs that the clowns are dealing out, and that's one of the main reasons why Tetsuo becomes part of the clowns, so he can get access to these drugs. And you could look at this as sort of a commentary on how drug use and addiction could really change a person. But yeah, once again, even though so far I've only read Volume 1 of Akira and I'm halfway through Volume 2, so far I'm really loving this story, and if you haven't read this comic, I would definitely recommend it. Now, as I mentioned before, in 1988 there was a film adaptation of this manga series, and both the manga and the film adaptation were extremely influential. Like, Akira actually had a huge influence on the Wachowskis when they made The Matrix. Also, the movie Chronicle was very much inspired by both the manga and the movie Akira. I also saw a bit of an Akira influence on shows like Batman Beyond, like the whole cyberpunk look for Batman Beyond. I would not be surprised if that was in some way influenced by Akira. And also, in the show Batman Beyond, there's this gang called the Jokers, who in the Batman Beyond universe are supposed to be this gang emulating the Joker. However, I would not be surprised if I found out that the Jokers from Batman Beyond were in some way influenced by the clowns from Akira. But yeah, that's my review on Volume 1 of Akira, and bye.